The way that you begin to build a healthy cross-generational team, number one, back to becoming a healthy person, you have to locate yourself. What are your beliefs about your team? What are your beliefs about yourself? How can you face those? How can you deal with them? Which beliefs are helping you? Which beliefs are hindering you?
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Workergenics Mastermind podcast. We have a special guest today, David Achata with Achata Coaching, and he is really passionate about having healthy people and organizations. And he's got a special topic related to that he's going to share that I think is really unique and something that a lot of organizations might be struggling with right now. David, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, Harley. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be able to talk with you and to connect with your audience.
So David, tell us a little bit about the background story of you. Let's get to know David and how you came to Achata Coaching.
So I'll start current and then we'll go do some flashbacks. So I currently work as a leadership development consultant and executive coach. And I'm really passionate about helping people understand that who you are will multiply within your organization. And so it's super important to be a healthy person. And the way that I came to this work was honestly a chaotic home. As I kind of look back on it, my origin story is two parents from very different backgrounds. My dad is from Peru. My mom was from a coal mining town in Virginia. And man, they really knew how to argue. And as a kid, I watched that and I remember thinking, what she's trying to say is that, and I just didn't understand why they couldn't talk with one another. And, superheroes and villains all have pain and trauma in their past. It's really what they choose to do with it. And just kind of the twists and turns of my life led me into this kind of work. But I haven't always done this, though I've been doing this now for 13, going on 14 years. Prior to that, I worked as a high school teacher. And then I also worked as a pastor for a number of years. And so what I like to do is I like to bring my experience as a teacher and even that pastoral heart into the leadership development world to help people understand, just how to be at their best and build the best teams they can.
So one thing you talk about is, being a healthy person. And what does a healthy person and a healthy organization look like to you?
Yeah, so a healthy person is somebody who understands what their boundaries are and what inputs they need. And so when I talk about boundaries with leaders, I think of it like it's like your front door in your house. It is a door that you can open and close, but someone else cannot open it unless invited to. And it's like if you were in your house eating a sandwich and somebody were to come in and take that sandwich without your permission, you'd be like, what the heck? Who are you? Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I think leaders are at their worst in many organizations is they're allowing people to come in and perpetually take their sandwiches. So they're leading out of bitterness or leading out of anger. And really the problem is not the organization. The problem is that they don't know how to express boundaries to say, no, that's off limits actually. Nope, that's my time. Yep, my phone's off for a reason. And I think we're coming into a time in the history of, corporate America where people have got to get healthier because if they're not, people won't stay on their teams and their organizations. So boundaries is a big one. Another one is the right inputs. I wrote a book called Executive Retreats for Busy Business Leaders. It's a mouthful, but I titled it on purpose that because I wanted leaders to understand that you are the executive of your own life. And there are 4 disciplines I talk about in that book. The first one is to go away alone, to understand that you have value outside of your work. The second one is go away with a guide, and that is to have someone who's beyond you in age or life stage as a mentor or a coach to help you understand some things that you maybe haven't had to live through yet. So go away alone, go away with a guide, go away with your team. And leaders might be more familiar with that one. But what I talk about in the book is the idea of building social resilience. And that's the idea that we humans don't have armor or claws like animals, but we do have the ability to lean in and trust one another and build strength. So when times get hard, we move towards solutions as opposed to away from solutions. And the last one is go away with your family. And the reason for that, back to the first one, is you multiply who you are. And so the way that you're interacting with your family is a pace that other people are also mimicking. And so if you can learn to exemplify what that's like, you're going to actually have healthier family members in your organization. But beyond that, it's also about learning that your family has a lot to give you, and it's not just about you giving to them. And so when I talk about inputs, these are four of the big ones I talk about with leaders, and I've seen over and over and over again, coaching leaders or having some of those leaders come away with me to do retreats, that most people are lacking in probably at least three of those. But learning to get more of them in place almost always helps somebody's life get cleaned up exponentially.
What are some characteristics that, someone watching this might be doing some introspection and say, well, I've got boundaries. I think I've got boundaries and got great inputs. Are there some kind of key characteristics or telltale signs you could share with people to be like, hey, if this is happening, then maybe you do need to think about your boundaries a little bit more. Maybe it is time to think about getting some better inputs.
I think a lot of it has to do with paying attention to your own energy level. Are you perpetually tired or exhausted? That's one. And I think that another one probably has to do with your attitude. Are you bitter? Do you feel like people are taking advantage of you? I learned 2 words today, by the way, 2 Greek words that are actually common. One of them is more common in English. The other is not, but it is an English word. And this comes back to this attitude of beliefs. And how do you know, what are the characteristics if you're not living in good countries? So paranoia, we're familiar with. Paranoia is believing the world is against you. There actually is an opposite word in English that I think is Google search less than 0.5% of all words on Google. And it's the word pronoia. Do you know that word?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
I just learned it today. And the idea of pronoia is believing that the world is actually for you, for your favor, for your good. And so I think that what some people can realize is, am I more paranoid about the world? Do I believe this call I'm getting or this email is against me? This person is against me? Or do I believe there's actually something good that's going to happen here that I need to give or I need to receive? And it's really hard to get to that place if you're perpetually tired. So so many thoughts on it. There was a book that came out years ago called The Happiness Advantage. I think they found that a person's outlook is 50% genetics and 40% had to do with your attitude, your natural outlook, and 10% was circumstantial. So
that you touched on something there about the pronoia. It's not a word I'm familiar with, but the concept I've heard of. And it's funny that you brought up, because a lot of really kind of positive and outwardly successful, and when you get to know them, I would say inwardly successful people that I'm familiar with have that belief. They don't believe the world's out to get them or that things happen to them. They believe they bring the experiences to them from their energy and their attitude and their outlook. And if you have that mindset, it just shifts things. And even if something that could be perceived as a bad event happening to you, there's a lesson to be learned. If you look at it in the right way, it can help you grow and it can benefit you.
Oh yeah. And it takes time to nurture that. That's not something you can turn on overnight. I was just thinking about this because I'm developing a talk for our local Chamber of Commerce. It's kind of like marriage. When I've been I've been married for 23 years. My wife's a therapist. She wasn't always a therapist, but in recent years, her life has gone in that direction. Super excited for her. And when I've been at my worst in my marriage, I believe that my wife is against me. And it took many, many, many years of personal work individually and together for us to come to the place where we realized, we're actually for each other and we came together for a reason. And one of those byproduct reasons is I actually needed the annoyance that this woman's bringing to me, because it's exposing something in me that needs to change about me. And I think, back to, leaders and teams and organizations, I've seen it so many times in the unhealthy ones where people believe that this team, these people are against them. And it takes time to nurture a different kind of belief through your own personal work and through time together with your team to say, actually, together, we're a genius. And even though what we're going through is hard right now, let's lean in. And that only happens by nurturing really healthy relationships.
Now, I can speculate, but I'd love to hear from you if you could share some specific examples of some of the positive outcomes that have come about in the teams and organizations that you've worked with, where they have embraced what you're talking about, where they're, setting those boundaries, improving their inputs, and, nurturing themselves to be healthy. What are some of the tangible observables that, you could share of hey, if you want to experience these things, this is what work you need to do.
Two stories come to mind. One is of an individual I worked with who had a small business, about 35 employees. The other is sort of a middle-sized business that had maybe 300 employees. Years ago, I met a veterinarian. He asked me if we could talk about teamwork over coffee. So we began to talk about it. And as I dug in and kind of got to know him a little bit better, what I realized was his marriage was not great. He had a lot of personal stuff in his life and in his story that hadn't been addressed. And the byproduct of that was he was kind of a paranoid person. Scared of what was going to happen with his wife and his marriage, what was happening in his organization. And what we started doing, we ended up embarking on some coaching work together. It wasn't the intent originally was let's just talk about leadership over coffee like once a month. But what happened was he learned to get healthy in his life by learning to address some stuff in his story. He had come from a background where he was left alone a lot. And this was in the probably early 80s in Washington. It was around the same time one of those mass murderers was roaming the streets, like killing people up in this area.
Yeah.
And this was the same neighborhood and the same time frame out in the Pacific Northwest where he grew up. And he was just riding his bike for like 10, 15, 20 miles at a time as a little kid because there was no one around, nothing to do. So he learned to go back and like say, wait a minute. Though that may or may not have been normal for the time, it wasn't healthy or good for me. It helped create this belief in me that no one out there cares about me and the world is against me unless I kind of man up and take control of it. So he had to go back and like look at his story and address his beliefs. And from there, he had to learn his leadership style. He learned that he was more of a task-focused leader, and he was actually like missing people who were more oriented around the human aspect of teams and leadership. So he realized, oh, like I'm healthier now in my story. I understand why I do these things. Oh, I've been like using the same tool for everything and it's not working here. So he had to learn how to do that and develop a team that could, depend on humans, not just getting the task done.
Yeah.
And then he had to define a higher cause for his organization. And, the result is that after working with him and helping him in some of these areas personally, helping his team understand some of these things for themselves, and then beginning to work with his small company, their revenue went way up. Their business has grown exponentially. I think that a couple of years ago, they were maybe 30-something employees. I think today they're in the 50s. They're doing really good, but a lot of it was rooted in him, in his beliefs, in him understanding his leadership style and how to inspire people within his organization. So that's like an individual one, but like a bigger one. Mm-hmm. Years ago, I had a company, a manufacturing type company. They had a lot of managerial positions, maybe 20, and they were really struggling to get people to take those positions. And so I came in and did an assessment and really learned they didn't have a lot of support structures for people. So why would they step into management? Like they're not going to get any training or much help. And so we began to put in place growth and development program for their leaders. And that was like a really good step one. They needed to understand how do you build trust on a team? How do you understand personality? How do you help inspire people to lead from a higher cause? But as we got deeper into the program, what we learned was began to start to work with their engagement scores as they would score low on certain areas every year or two. And one of those areas was compassion. And I talked to my wife about it and I said, hey, how do we help an organization like this? She said, oh, that's easy. The reason they're scoring low on compassion is because they're not compassionate with themselves. Like they're not easy on themselves. And she directed me to the work of Dr. Kristen Neff, who found that self-compassion is this whole idea of treating yourself the same way that you would treat a friend who were struggling. And she found some data in many instances, but one in particular that comes to my mind is people who went into war zones in the U.S. military. They actually had lower instances of PTSD, not depending on how much action they'd seen in the war, if they practice self-compassion. So do they listen to their inner ally? So the pronoia, right? The world is for me. I can, like, this is okay. Or were they listening to the inner critic? And as we surveyed those managers, we found that probably like 85% of them listened to the inner critic. And so we had to learn to teach them self-compassion, and they learned to extend compassion to their teams. And there's more to it than that, but that's just one example. And the byproduct of that is their turnover went down. Makes sense, right?
That's
like
huge,
people
yeah.
are staying now. So turnover has changed, and they have also continued to grow through the ups and downs of the market. What I'm trying to like get at, you're picking up, I hope, is that when people can learn that they themselves are the root of most of the problems that they face, suddenly the universe seems less out of control, because I can't control what you're going to say or what you're going to do, but I can control what I'm going to say. So those are, I think, two simple examples.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you for sharing those. I think they can hit home to a lot of people. So let's go and shift a little bit. You talked about this concept of like building a cross-generational team and how to work with cross-generational teams. Tell me a little bit more about that. Why is that a challenge or something people need to think about right now?
There's a labor economist I've been reading. You may have read him. If not, I want to recommend to you and listeners to read him. His name is Ron Hetrick. He's got a company, I think, called Lightcast. And what he found is that right now there's like 4.5 million jobs open for people with college degrees. And there's only 2 million college degree workers to take them. And there's way more data that he's got like that. But I won't go into it because you should listen to him. But the reason I'm telling you is that there are attitudes that have been present in past generations that just aren't true anymore. And our attitudes trickle down to people. And so we adopt these beliefs that aren't rooted in reality. Example, when I came into the workforce, when I graduated college, in 2000, 2001, it was hard to get a job. The labor market was really saturated. And I remember the first job I ever took, I was in high school as a waiter at a Pizza Hut. And the whole idea back then was, man, you better just take any abuse that your company wants to give you because there aren't a lot of jobs. And if you get one, you're lucky. That's not true anymore. And what's happened is that our older generations that are nearing retirement, the baby boomers, not all, but many of them still have an attitude like that. Best, the baby boomer generation is a really strong work ethic, very loyal, but can be resistant to change. And an attitude with an older generation is, hey, you're lucky to have a job. You better just, grow up and do what you're told. Well, the truth is it's really easy to go find another job somewhere else right now. And so that's why teams have to learn to develop the healthiest workplaces or leaders of organizations. How do I develop the healthiest workplaces I can so people want to stay? So that's the baby boomer dynamic. And then you've got me, the Gen Xers. The positive attributes are really independent and resourceful, but the potential liability is cynicism and disengagement. And then you got the millennials, and what they have is they're really tech savvy, entrepreneurial, but they can at their worst be impatient and entitled. And then you've got the newbies coming in, which is like my daughter's age. She's in college, the Gen Zs. The positive attributes are, man, they're really socially conscious. And if you don't have a way to inspire them, you won't keep them. They'll go somewhere and work for less if the work of your company is inspiring. But the liability is they can be over-reliant on technology and have a hard time actually having real conversations with people. And so we have all these people working together on the same teams. And so the question is, how do I get them to, work together? And just the ideas that I'm kicking around as I'm preparing to talk to a bunch of manufacturing leaders here in just a couple of weeks, I was thinking about this idea of being lost in the woods. I'll ask you, Harley, because you're a smart guy. You probably know this. Let's make believe you have a map and you're lost in the woods. What's the first thing you need to do?
We need to get some reference points.
Yeah, exactly. And you need to know how to read that map, how to find those reference points. So the way that I would put that is you've got to locate yourself. And so the way that you begin to build a healthy cross-generational team, number one, back to becoming a healthy person, you have to locate yourself. What are your beliefs about your team? What are your beliefs about yourself? How can you face those? How can you deal with them? Which beliefs are helping you? Which beliefs are hindering you? So you've got to locate yourself. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to locate your team. Where are they at? What do they believe? What are their strengths? What are their liabilities? And then the last is you build social resilience, which I've talked about, which is learning to do things together that build them up versus tear them down. And the way that you build a team up is by doing things together when times are good, so that when times are bad, you know how to lean into a solution. And I've got a story that illustrates this, but I want to pause because I know there's a lot of things I threw in there. But locating yourself, locating your team, and then building strength in the good times with social resilience so that when the bad times come, they'll lean into solutions. So that's how you do it, but you've got to start with locating yourself.
So it's not just, hey, talk to David when we have the major crisis. It's like, hey, we need to be working and talking to David, thinking about these things while times are good. And as we start developing things, especially if it's like, you're thinking about hiring for a new team or new project, like that's the good time to start getting these systems and frameworks in place. I imagine it's much more difficult to try to do this kind of work and analysis and improvement when you're in the middle of a crisis and got team members quitting and all this kind of stuff, which I imagine, unfortunately, is probably when a lot of people do come to you, though.
Oh, man, you nailed it. Yeah, and unfortunately, when you're in a moment of crisis, you don't have the attention to give to something like this that really needs to be given to it. It can be done. It's just a little messier start, but definitely when times are good is the time to lean in. And I think that one way that, leaders and organizations can kind of assess, do we need some work like this, is really just looking at the quality of the work that you're doing. And this sounds kind of funny, but the drama in your workplace. Drama, like what I call it when I work with teams, is it's clean pain or dirty pain. Clean pain is, hey, Harley, like there was something that needed to be done. You said it was supposed to be done by today and it wasn't. Like, can we meet and talk about that? That's clean pain. Dirty pain is, man, why are you such a slacker? Come on, man. Like, it's full of accusations and shame. And unfortunately, what happens that people don't realize is that if I communicate with you like that and you're together with me, unfortunately, more than you are with your family, you take that home to your families. People don't understand that their behavior is multiplying. So if you've got workplace drama exemplified with a lot of dirty pain going on, you may need to do some work like this. And of course, that's what keeps me busy.
Love it. You shared a lot of great insights so far. And I know that there's a couple other cool things you have going on. You just recently started a podcast. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, man. Thanks for giving me the chance to talk about it. Yeah, this just came out about a week ago. I've been encouraged for years by friends, family, colleagues to create something. And so I created a podcast called How People Grow, Finding Wisdom in Every Season. And season 1 is about learning to get outside of your own worldview. And what I wanted to do with this podcast was I wanted to bring together the best of all of the worlds I've ever worked in. So again, I was a teacher one time. I worked as a pastor for a few years. Now I've done all this executive and leadership development work in the corporate world. So I'm interviewing people from all these backgrounds, and I have a new co-host each season. This season, I partnered up with Dr. Tyler Rogers at Scout Counseling in Chattanooga. And we talked about, how do you talk to one another in such a way to where you can get outside of your own head and actually hear what somebody else is saying. So we worked through that for a number of episodes. And our next season is going to be on resilience. How do you become a resilient person? And so you can find that on Podbean, and you can do, I think it's podbean.com/howwegrow, or it's how people grow. I keep messing that up, but it's how people grow. And also it'll be up soon on my personal website, which is davidachata.com. And I'll also have it linked in my corporate website, which is achatacoaching.com. But yeah, I love people to tune in and listen to it. And I mix it up a lot. We talk about business and leadership. We talk about personal stuff. We talk about religion. It's all in there.
And you're an author as well. You have an ebook on your website people can download. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. If you go to my website, achatacoaching.com, and sign up for my newsletter, there's a free ebook you can download. And it's called Make Space to Find Vision. And it's ways that people can start to make traction on some of their most important goals. So that's there. And I also do have a couple of books that are up on Amazon. My 2 leadership books go together. You can read them separately, but one is called Embrace What You Don't Know, and actually tell the story of that doctor I mentioned. And it's about how do you gain stability in your life, your leadership, and your organization. And then the second book, leadership book, is Executive Retreats, I mentioned. And it talks about those 4 inputs, those 4 disciplines that leaders need to be steady and healthy. I've got some other stuff that's out there too, but that's related to the business work.
Awesome. Well, David, it has been a pleasure having you on the podcast today and hearing your advice and expert tips from your experience. We're going to make sure we have all the links dropped in the episode description here so people can get in touch with you. And I encourage everyone who's listening or watching this online, if you like what you hear from David, go to his website, check out his ebook, get in touch with him. I'm sure he'd be happy to have a conversation with you and see if there's a way that he can help support you as well. Thank you, David.
You're welcome.